Hello, everyone. My name is Jenna Weiss, and I'm the Assistant Director of Public Programs at the Jewish Museum. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Gertrude and David Fogelson Lecture, Netsuke, Visual Storytelling and Craftsmanship. This talk is presented in conjunction with the exhibition, The Hair with Amber Eyes, on view through May 15th, 2022, and we encourage you to visit if you are able to do so. Now I would like to introduce our speaker. Monica Binchik is the Diane and Arthur Abbey Associate Curator of Japanese Decorative Arts at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. With research specialties in Japanese decorative arts and textile, she held prior curatorial and research positions at the Met and Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto, where she earned a second PhD on Japanese lacquers. She was co-curator of Kimono, A Modern History, and curated Discovering Japanese Art, American Collectors and the Met, Japanese Bamboo Art, the Abbey Collection, and Kyoto, Capital of Artistic Imagination. She has published widely on decorative arts and collecting history, and it is my pleasure to welcome her to present this talk.
Good afternoon. It is my great pleasure to be with you tonight and discuss Netsuke as visual storytelling and craftsmanship in conjunction with the Jewish Museum's very successful exhibition, The Hair with Amber Eyes, an installation that tells the story of the Efrusi family. Around the 1870s, the French witnessed a vogue of things Japanese. Trade with Japan had been open to the West since 1854, and cultural exchange and the fashion of Japanism in art and popular culture were well underway by the 1870s. Woodblock prints, lacquer boxes, screens, fans, and floral prints would be popular collectibles, and art, popular culture, and literature would engage with new and exotic Asian views. As travel and commercial and cultural exchange accelerated between France and the Far East in the second half of the century, reconsiderations of Western aesthetics and cultural norms were infused with the fashion of Japanism, which also permeated the work of Mallarmé, Émile Zola, and Marcel Proust, and got intertwined with the circulation of aesthetic ideas, individuals, goods, art, and memory. During the Edo period, from 1615 to 1867, a highly original and spirited new art form evolved and flourished in Japan. This was Netsuke, small sculptures uniquely designed to be worn, an ingenious and decorative means of suspending objects from the traditional sash, the obi, which was wrapped around the kimono. The demand for Netsuke largely grew out of the fashion for carrying bulky items, such as tobacco pouches, purses, and the tiered boxes called Inro, or seal case, originally used to hold seals and later medicine, which were difficult to tuck into the folds of the pocketless kimono, or too heavy to insert into the sleeves of the kimono. It was through Japanism that the popularity of Netsuke dramatically soared, and a vast number of Netsuke were exported from Japan, starting in the early 1860s. While the total number of Netsuke that left Japan is unknown, it is said that many foreigners who visited Japan purchased them in bulk, 500 or 1,000 at once. A Paris art dealer, Philippe Zichel, alone amassed over 5,000 Netsuke. Among the earliest written remarks on Netsuke are those by Sir Rutherford Alcock, the first British diplomatic representative to live in Japan. He was an early enthusiast of Netsuke, and his Japanese exhibits and the London Exposition in 1862 included some examples. In his well-known Capital of the Tycoon, published in 1863, he mentions Netsuke in a positive manner, in contrast to his highly critical attitude towards other forms of Japanese art. I quote, Their carvings in ivory of groups of figures or animals are often the best style of the art, and although by their cheapness they are evidently the fruit of a kind of skilled labor by no means uncommon, they could only be produced in Europe by some of our best artists and at a proportionate cost. End of quote. As a larger number of Netsuke became available on the Western market, an antiquarian standard whereby the older the object, the better, further prevailed. And it was understood that Netsuke's value would increase through time and use, and that evidence of having been used would further enhance their value. Such an antiquarian standard was linked to Netsuke's essential Japaneseness, as they were perceived as an absolutely original and indigenous art. Seymour Trower, a British Netsuke collector, in his summary of why Netsuke are attractive to many collectors, is a good overview of how Westerners understood this form of art at the time. He asserts that the Netsuke's qualities as a work of art were to be found, I quote, its marvelously polished surface, its originality, its unrivaled finish, its spirit, where often the most faithful observation of nature bursts, end of quote. Its visual and tactile charm, its affordability, and its usefulness for learning about Japanese customs and popular beliefs. Customarily, the sagemono or hanging things, which could be objects as heavy as a writing case or a sake container, were strung on a cord that passed through a sliding bead or ojime, which acted as a tightener, and then was threaded through a toggle, the netsuke, and knotted. The cord was passed under the obi from below, so that the netsuke perched on top of the sash, while the sagemono hung securely a few inches below it. The growth of Netsuke was stimulated by social changes in the 16th and 17th centuries, affecting fashion in sagemono or hanging things. Soon after Tokugawa Ieyasu became shogun in 1603, he instituted a stringent control to secure his power and maintain peace. A strict Neo-Confucian code was established. Japanese society was stratified into classes. The highest included the samurai, and it was followed by the farmer, artisan, and merchant classes. Laws governed private conduct, dress, marriage, and for some, place of residence. Although the highest class was subject to sumptuary laws, samurai were allowed to wear two swords as symbols of their rank. With no wars to fight, sword blades and fittings became more decorative than practical, and wealthy samurai lavished enormous amounts of money on them. On formal occasions, samurai sometimes wore Inro. Since, like sword fittings, they were not subject to sumptuary laws, Inro also became objects for show and were elaborately embellished with gold and other precious materials. At first, only the samurai class could afford them, but eventually they were adopted by the prospering members of other classes, and soon many wore Inro with matching netsuke. The term netsuke literally translates as root attach, suggesting that the first netsuke were natural, found objects, such as a piece of root. Indeed, suitable natural objects were undoubtedly used to hang a pouch or natural gourd from the belt right across East Asia from an early date, although they were probably not used in the same way as subsequent netsuke. It is hardly surprising that such items were not treasured beyond their period of usefulness, and even if they were, it's doubtful that we would recognize them as netsuke. Throughout the Edo period, interesting stones, shells, and wood with natural worn holes, gourds, nuts, and bones continued to be used as netsuke alongside the specially carved and created works. During the late 16th and first half of the 17th centuries, for example, it became popular with both men and women to wear a narrow sash. This enabled either the cords that together form the sash to be passed through a ring, which was called obiguruma, or alternatively, just a few of the lower cords securely suspending the inro and pouch. A regular thin sash could equally be threaded through the ring. This is very well illustrated in this early 17th century folding screen, where you can see men wearing inro, pouch, or both, all with a thin sash and with the ring that helps to attach the inro to the sash. Over a period of time, the opening of the already thick ring became even smaller, and instead of being tied to it, the two ends of the cords were passed through the opening. These were initially tied in a large knot to prevent them slipping back through the hole. Throughout the 17th century, moreover, it was common practice to hang the inro and pouch from separate cords, but with one netsuke, as you can see in this illustration. This made it possible to tie a bulky knot that consisted of 4 cords ends instead of 2. The bulky knot was then superseded by the practice of attaching the cords to some manner of plug, which was a more secure method of achieving the same end. Another type of plug was made like a netsuke in the form of 2 concentric rings, one smaller than the other, with no visible sign of the cord on its uppermost surface. The cord ends were probably attached to the smaller ring, either on the underside or somehow on the inside. It is highly unlikely that netsuke would have developed if pouches and containers with specialized functions had not evolved during the second half of the 16th century. The inro was the first such container to have made its appearance. According to literary sources, the term inro was used as early as the 14th century, originally referring to square or round tiered containers, which were usually made in China of lacquer. By the second half of the 16th century, however, inro had become much smaller and were adapted so that they could be suspended from the sash. In the form of smaller and widely known today, the inro is a small but distinctive container, usually made of lacquer and comprising 2 or more stacking sections that fit tightly into one another. Here you can see an inro open with the sections revealed. Although it was initially used to hold a man's seal or stamp pad or supply of medicines, it rapidly became a highly decorative and costly fashion accessory with little or no practical function. Once established in its fully developed form in Japan, the inro became enormously popular in a short period of time. As the inro could be freely combined with matching netsuke, it was a fun activity to put together a combination of matching inro and matching netsuke. Collections of netsuke in Japan were stored in drawers like this one, with the name of the netsuke indicated by their side, and these were tucked into cabinets. Sometimes they were stored together with the matching inro, as you can see in this slide, in beautifully made lacquer cabinets or sometimes even large-sized drawers. A stylish man would have dozens of Netsuke and Inro, and as I mentioned, sometimes they change them out to adjust to the season or to the festivities. The Inro was hung from the right side of the obisash, while the left was reserved for the swords. This very early Edo period women's Kabuki screen in the Metropolitan Museum's collection shows a very interesting scene from Kyoto. The focus of this composition is a young woman, Okuni, dressed as a gallant samurai, performing the Kabuki skit called Chaya Asobi, or Tea House Entertainments. Her comic sidekick, Saruwaka, or young monkey, also played by a woman, holds a branch of maple leaves or flowers at the front of the stage. In its earliest phase, Kabuki was performed by female dancers or courtesans, playing both men and women in sexually provocative skits. Kabuki, as we know it today, a respected form of classical theater with complex plots performed by male actors in men's and women's roles, did not emerge until the end of the 17th century. Here you can see the stylish Okuni dressed as a samurai with very eccentric accessories, including a rosary with a cross hanging from her neck, a beautiful scabbard, and from her thin obisash, you can see a hanging inro and a hanging pouch. I'm showing two more details of the same kind of outfit where you can see the early way of hanging the inro and pouch, the ring that was attached to a few cords of the obisash, and also the other eccentric accessories in detail. When the Portuguese introduced tobacco into Japan in the 16th century, smoking took hold immediately. Crops were planted in southern Kyushu, and soon the majority of Japanese were enjoying pipes, although it was considered improper for members of the upper classes to smoke outside their homes. An edict forbidding the use of tobacco was passed in 1609, primarily because the habit was considered unsanitary. But the law was difficult to enforce and was finally repealed in 1716 in the hope that tobacco crop would help the Japanese economy. The repeal encouraged smoking. Among tradespeople, it became an integral and almost ritualistic part of any business transaction. The demand for portable implements, a pipe case, tobacco pouches, and lighting devices increased, and with it, the production of Netsuke. As a large percentage of the male population began smoking, hundreds of thousands of examples were created in various styles and qualities. Here I'm showing a luxurious example from the Metz collection, which has Dutch embossed leather and with silver foil decoration, beautifully colored. The clasp is made of gold and metal alloys, and the ojime is made of gold. The highlight of the set is a Netsuke, which is a big piece of freshwater pearl. It's embedded in a fine gold mount depicting waves. The waves are executed in great detail with dramatic curves and round water drops. Its valuable materials make this tobacco pouch and Netsuke the ultimate luxury accessory. In particular, it was during the Kyoho era the first half of the 18th century that the tobacco pouch came into being in the form in which it is generally known today. It was not only widely used by the working man, but also came to represent a symbol of status and wealth among the townsmen, especially merchants. The pouch itself was made from a variety of materials that were often decorated, including paper, fabric, and different types of leather, the most treasured being imported luxury items to suit individual taste. The pouch was closed by a flap that was secured by a metal clasp, the kanagu, while the top was fitted with 2 or 3 eyelets through which a continuous cord was threaded. The cord ends then passed through an ojime before being secured in a netsuke. Alternatively, they were attached to a pipe and pipe case, which was thrust into the back of the man's sash, thus serving the same function as a regular netsuke. The tobacco pouch reached its popularity during the 19th century, when some of the finest examples were produced, many in the form of matching components. At the same time, it also became fashionable to substitute the metal chains for cord to which the pipe and case were attached, necessitating the use of a large netsuke, as you can see in this luxurious woodblock printed surimono, a New Year greetings card. After passing through the ojime, the tightener, the individual cords were splayed out and attached to the top of the pouch. The traditional Japanese smoking ensemble, pipe, tobacco pouch, and netsuke, depicted here in a print by Kubo Shuman dated 1813. You can see a luxurious leather tobacco pouch and beautifully made netsuke. This is another surimono showing beautiful detailed designs for embossed leather, again, to be used for tobacco pouches. In this example, there is another combination of a ojime, a kagami butanetsuke, and the beautiful leather pouch, and the pipe, which is represented under the pouch. This fun surimono, or New Year's greeting card, has a feather brush and the so-called doran, which is a kind of medicine case, and a very cute netsuke attached to it in a form of a white rat with black eyes. I'm going to show a few more examples of the tobacco pouch from the Metz collection, such as this one made of leather with elaborate chain and ivory netsuke attached to it. More examples of the leather tobacco pouch with matching ojime and netsuke. This one is made of expensive brocade. And this luxurious set was designed by Shibata Zeshin, the most well-known lacquer artist in the second half of the 19th century. The pipe case is made of black lacquer with the design executed in sprinkled silver and gold composition, a beautiful pipe with a gilded decoration, and the tobacco pouch is made of printed cotton, which was imported from India. It was called sarasa and a luxury item, very expensive. That's why it was part of the fashion accessory world. And again, a beautiful ivory carving, the netsuke is attached to the pouch and the pipe together. The sarasa fabrics, such as this one, were thought out to create tobacco pouches and other accessories. Whereas the tobacco pouch was made from pliable materials, The tonkotsu, or tobacco box, was rigid, manufactured from a hard substance, such as wood, although often decorated with a combination of other materials. Of the various possible components of a tobacco set, the tonkotsu is less studied. Although there are very few early surviving examples, it seems likely that initially, at least, it was more widely used than the pouch. The production of both the pouch and the tonkotsu undoubtedly came into their own during the 19th century. The tonkotsu, which was generally made of two sections, a container and the lid, was supplied with cord channels, also requiring an ojime to help keep the parts together. The ends of the cord were then secured to a netsuke or a pipe case. In the next slide, you can see a very unusual example from the Metz collection, which is made of metal and decorated with cloisonné. It's a beautiful piece, and in the detail, you can see the delicate details of the wires which were attached to the body and then filled with the colorful enamel and fired together to create the cloisonné composition. You can also see the hole, the himotoshi, where the cord was pulled through the netsuke. Another example, again from the Metz collection, made of black carved lacquer, and the matching netsuke is made of red carved lacquer. And this combination highlights how fashionable, stylish men matched the netsuke with the tonkotsu. I would like to briefly mention some of the collectors who helped the Met to build its extensive collection of netsuke and Inro. From the earliest years of the Metropolitan Museum, there were fervent advocates of Japanese art, including James Jackson Jarves, Russell Sturgis, and John Lafarge, who helped the Met enhance its fledgling collections in the late 19th century. The first official bequest to the Met in 1881 was the collection of Stephen Whitney Phoenix, a traveler and philanthropist, which included an array of fine Japanese netsuke, inro, and lacquers, which were shown in the museum as early as 1873. The 1870s was a decade of heightened interest in Japanese decorative arts in America, engendered in part by the Centennial Exhibition of 1876, held in Philadelphia. Louis Comfort Tiffany assembled a collection of Asian art that informed his design for the sumptuous goods he produced for New York's high society. Among Tiffany's associates was Samuel Coleman, an American painter and interior designer, and Edward C. Moore, Tiffany and Company's artistic director and chief designer of silver manufacturing. Moore bequeathed his extensive holdings of Japanese textiles, ceramics, metalworks, bamboo baskets, netsuke, and inro to the Metropolitan Museum in 1891. One of the most interesting collectors of netsuke was Margaret Olivia Slocum Sage, or Mrs. Russell Sage, a progressive New York philanthropist who was strongly committed to social causes, especially women's education, who was also an enthusiast of netsuke and one of the very early female collectors of Japanese art. In 1910, she acquired for the museum more than 2,500 netsuke, which she bought from Adam Clark Roman, a Pasadena bookstore owner and photographer who worked in Japan in Yokohama as a photographer and put together this extensive collection because he was interested in learning about the history of Japan, also the legends and literature that was popular in Japan. Henry O. Havemeyer, the Sugar King, met Samuel Coleman, Tiffany, and Edward C. Moore in the early 1870s, and he also visited the Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition in 1876. Havemeyer purchased Japanese lacquer boxes, Inro and textiles, some Netsuke, and that was the beginning of his extensive collecting in the field of Japanese art. He and his second wife, Louisine, put together an extensive collection ranging from Buddhist paintings, no robes, folding screen, Inro lacquer boxes, and tea caddies. The Havemeyer collection reflected the sensibilities of French Japanism, no doubt nurtured by Louisine's friendship with the painter Mary Cassatt. The Havermeyers never made it to Japan, however, worked with dealers based in the United States, including Yamanaka Sadajiro of Yamanaka and Company, Matsuki Bunkyo of Boston, and the famous Parisian dealer Siegfried Bing. The last collector I'm going to introduce is Benjamin Altman, who is well known for the department store that bore his name and his fine collection of old master paintings. The story of his Netsuke and lacquer collection is not well known though. When in 1914 his collection came to the Metropolitan Museum, that was the largest and most valuable collection of paintings, porcelains, tapestries, rugs, china, enamels, and other objects received by the Metropolitan Museum. Altman put together a choice collection of Japanese lacquer that included Inro with fitting Netsuke, and he displayed them in his home together with Chinese porcelain. Fine Netsuke, like this group from the Jewish Museum's exhibition, are carved on all surfaces, including the underside. Most are superbly balanced and will stand unsupported on a flat surface. Even slender pieces 6 or 7 inches high will remain upright by themselves. The cord openings, the himotoshi, were incorporated into the composition in such a way that the Netsuke would hang properly and the knot would be as inconspicuous as possible. In many early examples, the openings were part of the design itself, but more often they were cut into the back or the underside. Part of the appeal of Netsuke is their smooth, agreeable feel, a special quality called aji in Japanese, by which the artist communicates his spirit through touch as well as sight. Aji is enhanced by handling. These beautiful little carvings were designed to be fondled and touched, and with age, the touch, the oils from the palm of the hand produces a patina that gives luster to wood and mellows tints to ivory. Again, a surimono with the combination of a lacquer inro and an ivory netsuke, a sculpture which you can enjoy from all sides. Again, from the Jewish Museum collection, a small selection to represent the most prevalent form of netsuke with the widest variety of subjects and materials, which were called katabori, or carving on all sides. Although they could be almost any shape, katabori are generally compact and in keeping with their use. It is a combination from the Metz collection of an 18th century lacquer inro with a bright green agate ojime and a katabori netsuke representing a basket with fish and other sea animals caught by a fisherman, to show you how these combinations work together again for a stylish dandy man. Netsuke can be grouped according to their form and shape and type. This one, called manju. Manju Netsuke derive their name and shape from the round, flat rice cake, eaten mainly at the Japanese New Year. The simplest were made of solid pieces of ivory with a quart hole in the center. A variation developed, first in wood and then in ivory, that had two halves that swiveled to open. This one has inlays in metal and metal alloys, also in mother of pearl. The front represents autumn with the flying geese, and the backside with wisteria symbolizes spring. Another common form of Netsuke is the box shape. This made of red carved lacquer with a combination of a scholarly scene and peonies on the top can actually be open, so you could store small items inside. You can see the himotoshi, the cord fastener at the back of the Netsuke. Another type called ryusa is named for the 18th century carver, Netsuke carver, who was called ryusa, who created this hollowed out type of Netsuke and a method that made possible delicate open work designs and a lightweight form. This example from the Metz collection dated to the 18th century, attributed to Ryusa himself, with a composition of flowers and grasses with a praying mantis. The superb high relief carving and mist-like stippled surface of the piece is probably a work from the 18th century, and the manju shaped Netsuke is perfectly balanced. You can see the praying mantis highlighted in the composition against the mist, and the back of the Netsuke has a scarecrow. Another type of Netsuke, called kagami-buta in Japanese, or mirror lid, has a rounded shape with a disc or lid, commonly made of metal, set into a bowl of ivory or wood. This lid can be opened by releasing the tension on the cord, which is strung through the back of the bowl. The decoration was usually restricted to the metal, but in rare examples, the bowl was also elaborately carved. This example from the Metz collection has a cute crab on a lotus leaf, and this from the early 19th century is made in patinated copper disc with mixed metal alloy decoration and gilded details, a beautiful decorative piece. The next slide illustrates a selection of Inro with attached ojime and Netsuke from the Edward C. Moore collection, displaying a variety of combinations. As you can see, the forms, the shapes are amazing. The color combinations of the carved lacquer, the bamboo, the tortoise shell. It was really fun to play with the combination, and these inro hanging from the obisesh were certainly conversation subjects between friends. I'm showing a few examples just to illustrate the storytelling through the combination of the Netsuke and the Inro. The round Inro on the right side of the slide is an early one, early Edo period Inro made of tortoise shell and basketry. The channel for the cord is on the outside of the Inro, and to match the tortoise shell body, the Netsuke is in the shape of a turtle made of carved wood. Next to it in the middle, again an early Inro, probably from the early 18th century, with a composition of dragon among clouds and waves coming from China. a very finely executed lacquer work. And the ojime, made of carved ivory, is a small boy hanging onto the cord, while the Netsuke is a group of turtles. The next group also highlights the wide variety of materials, shapes, and forms achieved by masters of these art forms in the Edo period. The Inro on the right side is a beautiful lacquer combination with inlaid ducks. The Netsuke is a monkey. The middle one is a rare metal Inro. It was made in the late Edo or early Meiji period around the mid-19th century. It's made of a metal laminate called mokume, or wood grain in Japanese, decorated with crests. And the matching ojime is a cloisonné bead, and the Kagami-buta type Netsuke has chrysanthemums and butterflies executed in various metal alloys. The last one on the left side is a basketry Inro. It's very appropriate for the summer season. The ojime is a marbled ceramic bead, while the Netsuke is a box Netsuke with lacquer decoration of mandarin ducks. So each combination is unique, reflects the taste of the owner, and tells really interesting histories. This one, again, a early 19th century high quality surimono, shows a leather box called doran with an attached Netsuke, which is actually a watch. So it was not only the ivory carvings or wooden Netsuke that could be used as a toggle, but even a watch served the same function. When it comes to the documentation of Netsuke and early Netsuke carvings, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of records to rely on. By 1781, Inaba Tsuryo of Osaka, a connoisseur of sword fittings, would devote a volume of 7 of his Soken Kisho, which may be translated as a treasury of sword fittings and rare accessories, to 55 Netsuke carvers of his day and their designs. The text discusses artists working in Edo, present-day Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, and Wakayama, and suggests that they had originally produced other forms of sculpture, such as masks for the No Theater, Buddhist images, and architectural details before turning to Netsuke. He fails to mention what might be regarded as the first school of Netsuke artists, the earliest group having a definite stylistic relationship, who worked in southern Honshu in Iwami province. By the 19th century, however, many of the carvers cited in the Soken Kisho had come to be considered originators of schools in their own rights. Earlier written descriptions of the development of Netsuke do not exist, and since few 17th century examples survive, we have to rely on painted depictions such as hanging scrolls, folding screens, and prints for pictorial records of the early Netsuke. Fortunately, many fine Netsuke survived from about the 1750s. Early 18th century examples are usually large, spirited, and original in design, being more direct expressions of the creator's personalities and geographical locations than the later pieces. For instance, Osaka Netsuke reflected the vitality of a bustling commercial center, while those made in Kyoto, the ancient imperial capital, were dignified and restrained, more refined. And the artists in the remote area of Iwami were interested in naturalistic local subjects rendered in indigenous materials. Finally, I would like to show a few examples of various types of Netsuke made of all kinds of materials. Netsuke have depicted a multitude of subjects and have been made from practically every material found in Japan. The simplest and probably the earliest were of stone, shell, walnut shell, and small gourds. Later and more sophisticated ones were carved from ivory and wood, particularly boxwood, cypress, ebony, cherry, pine, and bamboo. Less commonly employed were bone, metal, and lacquer, although we will see a few of these as well. This tall Netsuke from the Metz collection is a variation on the legend of two symbiotic characters, Ashinaga and Tenaga. Ashinaga means long legs, Tenaga, long arms. They worked together to catch fish that made up most of their diet. Long legs entered the water, and long arms was able to reach down and catch the fish. This tall piece is more than 6 inches high, and as you can see, it stands on its own. And this early elongated style, which lasted only a brief period, it's a very interesting phase in the history of Netsuke. Because its shape, this Netsuke may have been worn either thrust into the sash or in the more usual way, held tight against the body by the cord passing through the two openings on the sides. The boar, which is the 12th zodiac animal, thought to process reckless courage. It is found wild in Western Japan, especially in the province of Iwami, where its tusks and teeth were carved by a group of Netsuke artists. This example, however, looks very cute, hiding between flowers and grasses, probably having a nap. This composition highlights another important aspect of Netsuke carving, that is, many of them were inspired by compositions published in woodblock prints. This example from a book by Tachibana Morikuni, published in 1720. Next, again, a interesting combination that with an ox and an ox herd, which is a symbol of a Zen parable of the path to enlightenment. You can see the fine details, such as the inside lining of the ox herder coat, or the signature embedded as a red seal on the underside of the ox. The next one, it's a very cute tanuki signed by Sukenaga, dated to the 19th century. The Netsuke carver came from Takayama in Gifu province, an area known for its beautiful yew trees. He invented the technique known as itobori, which is single knife stroke carving, which results in a figure marked by broad angular planes. He was also known for his exquisitely concise sculptures, of which this is an excellent example. The tanuki is known as a mischievous master of disguise and shape shifting. In this compact composition, the tanuki disguised itself as a monk wrapped in a lotus leaf. Several varieties of ivory were used to create Netsuke. Until well into the 19th century, marine ivories and elephant ivory, which came mainly from India through China, were imported to Japan. Elephant ivory was used for the plectra for the koto, a stringed instrument, and leftover pieces were sold to Netsuke carvers. The rarest and most precious of marine ivories came from the tusk of the narwhal, credited with medicinal and magical powers. Two major schools of artists used deer antler and the teeth and tusks of wild boar as their mediums. This 18th century ivory Netsuke from the Metz collection is one of our best. Many legends about the Han Dynasty in China tell of Kuan Yew, one of three friends who had sworn an oath of brotherhood and who were renowned for their heroic struggles for justice. This tall, imposing figure communicates strength and purpose. The interpretation is characteristically Chinese in the slenderness of the face, as well as in the style of the long, flowing robes. The undulating Mandarin headdress blends into the softly contoured drapery of the outer robe, while the sleeve falls in gentle folds from the left arm. Kuan Yew's elegantly formed hand, with its tapered fingers, touches his bird as if he were standing in quiet contemplation. His right arm holds the halberd behind him, further minimizing his martial character. This exquisite carving, enhanced by the patination of time and wear, is one of the finest 18th century Netsuke in our collection. I'm showing a similar ivory carving in a high quality surimono, again from the early 19th century, with a lacquer Inro next to it. GAMA Senion is often represented as a sage, and this representation is a little bit different from the typical GAMA Senion Netsuke because it's very muscular, very well defined, and usually Senions are depicted fully clothed, but here you can see his bare upper body. He here looks like a strong-willed, determined creature. However, the toad, which always accompanies him, is depicted in large size, sitting on his shoulder. He can morph into a toad, and the artist who made this Netsuke, Shuzan, was active in the late 18th, early 19th century, creating these kind of creative compositions. The next one, representing a Dutchman, will be very familiar because the foreigners or Nambanjin, southern barbarians, were very often represented in Japanese folding screen, on lacquer objects, and also on Inro. After the Tokugawa government banned Christianity and expelled the Portuguese in 1638, only the Dutch could trade and stay in Japan, and they were confined to the island of Deshima in Nagasaki. This Netsuke, made probably in the late 18th century, represents a Dutchman with its characteristic large eyes, big nose, tall figure, Western outfit, holding a cock, which is most likely a reference to the Dutch colony's pastime of cockfighting. The following example is one of my favorite Netsuke in the collection from the first half of the 19th century, made of ivory, and represents a hanging scroll from which Shoki, the demon queller, comes to life. The hanging scroll is partially rolled up, and you can see Shoki emerging with his characteristic big halberd or sword, and he chases a little demon trying to escape, while on the other side of the Netsuke, at the back of the hanging scroll, you can see another little demon or Oni trying to escape. Images of Shoki were thought to ward off demons, and this wonderful example is signed by Shu Osai. Chokaro Senyin was said to have a magical gourd from which he was able to conjure a small horse. This Netsuke represents a Chokaro Senyin holding the gourd, and on the back you can see the horse. The horse was said to be able to travel large distances without food and water. The Netsuke, which was made in the late 18th, early 19th century of ivory, is signed by Yoshitomo, and the artist decorated the robes of Chokaro with chrysanthemums, which are the symbols of longevity. The next Netsuke represents a white rabbit, and this is a masterpiece of understated simplicity and elegant design. The artist, Ohara Mitsuhiro, who lived in the 19th century, was born in a small town near Hiroshima. He studied poetry and tea ceremony and belonged to the Zen sect of Buddhism. He created this composition of the white rabbit almost to match the Inro, which is attached to, which is decorated with autumn grasses, and in the middle, a composition of the full moon showing again a rabbit with red eyes. And according to Japanese legends, a rabbit lives on a moon and prepares the elixir of immortality. So the rabbit is associated with the autumn harvest festival, the moon with the rabbit making the elixir. So it was a very auspicious combination of the Inro and Netsuke. The next one is a representation of a rat with 3 young from the mid-19th century. The rat was associated Daikoku, the god of wealth, and it's also the first sign of the zodiac. This Netsuke probably was worn as a talisman by somebody who was born in the year of the rat. The stag, a tall, slender sculpture, represents a stylistic transition between the highly imaginative creatures of the early to middle 18th century to the more naturalistic or realistic animals of the 19th century. This elegant design has an elegantly elongated pose, seated with upturned head and extended neck, sloping ribs, and it's an indication of a new interest in depicting the details of these animals. The dog, signed by Tomotada from the 18th century, is more realistic with the prominent ribs of the animal, its open mouth, and square jaw, as well as thick neck and broad chest. It's a little bit similar to a wolf, but it's a characteristic dog, and carved by the one of the artists who is associated with the Kyoto School of Carving, and one of the most famous 3 artists who were engaged in the Kyoto style and mentioned in the Soken Kisho. These ivory Netsuke of the elephant and blind man is an allegory concerning truth and how to interpret truth. The blind men are investigating the elephant, and they make an attempt to describe and explain it. Their findings, of course, are based on which part they touch. So it's never going to be completely true or complete. The tiny figures touching the huge body of the elephant, it's also quite humorous and amusing. And the master who created this Netsuke in the late 19th century took advantage of this humorous subject to create these fun Netsuke. Tigers are not native to Japan. Their absence spurred fanciful ideas about their nature and physical form. This feline resembles a household pet, a cat, but its strength is suggested by the well-formed paws. This Netsuke from the 18th century is also associated with the zodiac, as the tiger was part of the 12 animals associated with the zodiac. This very playful shishi, or Chinese guardian dog, has exaggerated features and looks really humorous, as if it was playing. The beautiful tones of the ivory indicate that this is an early Netsuke from the 18th century, and it was often touched and well loved. The kirin, a mythical animal, is a chimera. It has a head of a dragon, the body of a deer, legs and hooves similar to those of a horse, and the tail of a lion. Its horns lie against the back of its head. These kirin, or the oriental version of the unicorn, represent virtue. They move without noise and appear during good governance. This is again a beautiful carving from the 18th century, one of our best in the Met's collection. The tengu were originally thought to take the form of birds of prey and were depicted with both human and bird characteristics. The beaks of the earliest representations were later humanized and have unnaturally long noses. This Netsuke of a pair of winged creatures carrying a heavy load wrapped in textile offers a fascinating glimpse of some of the most represented characters in Japanese folklore from the second half of the 19th century. The seated Baku is another mythical creature. The Netsuke from the 18th century is a beautiful carving representing this mythical creature known to eat bad dreams. It has the trunk of an elephant, the tail of an ox, and the pose of a tiger. This piece is dated to the 18th century and a wonderful representation of supernatural beings in Japanese art. To show a variety, I'm showing you a string of mushrooms, which can be seen as just a fun representation of these vegetables, which are consumed by the Japanese, or as symbols of longevity. There might be a reference to eccentric painters such as Gertrude, who represented all kinds of vegetables in his screens and paintings. The next is the boar tusk Netsuke, decorated with a Chinese guardian dog, a shishi, and a cub, while on the other side you can see very fine incised roundels of poet portraits and poems. These ivory Netsuke dates to the first half of the 19th century, and it reveals the original form of the tusk. Finally, a composition of tea utensils showing the interest in the tea ceremony, as represented all the necessary utensils to serve tea. This Kagami Buta Netsuke shows a popular hero to emerge from the early Kamakura period, Minamoto Yoshitsune and his companion Benkei. According to the legend, Benkei, a monk who enjoyed fighting, met the young Ushiwakamaru, which is Yoshitsune's name from his childhood, at the foot of the Gojo Bridge in Kyoto. This is the incised carving on the lid of the Kagami Buta Netsuke. The youth bested the experience in a duel and defeated the master. This is a very popular story, which was often represented in Netsuke and Inro. Porcelain Netsuke are very rare, of course, because of the nature of the material, but this Hirado porcelain of a chestnut is an excellent example of how to execute very fine details in porcelain. These lacquer baku, also the mythical animal that eats the bad dreams, the nightmares, is made of wood decorated with lacquer and gold foil. Again, an excellent example of an earlier Netsuke. The tengu hatching from an egg is again made of wood with red lacquer. This type of representation of the birth of the mythical creature known as tengu was favored by many Netsuke carvers. The image of the small tengu breaking the shell of its egg is rendered particularly vivid through the use of red lacquer in this 18th century composition. To conclude this brief introduction to the history of Netsuke, I would like to bring back the topic to the hair with the amber eyes. And again, mention the beautiful exhibition at the Jewish Museum. One of the models for Proust's now world-renowned Jewish character, Charles Swann, was Charles F. Roussy, the art collector and critic who became director of the Gazette des Beaux-Arts and an avid fan of Japanism. He plays a major role in Edmond Duval's family memoir, The Hair with the Amber Eyes, A Hidden Inheritance. Duval's illustrative and poignant saga of the collection depicts a flourishing Jewish family as it benefits from new rights and embodies the Republican narrative of ideal assimilation through commerce and culture. A sign of the acquisition of cultural capital, the Netsuke collection at the Books Center was purchased by Charles F. Roussy and later gifted as a wedding present that was passed down in the family. In both Duval's and Proust's narratives, Charles comes to stand for the height of positive integration. He's well-educated, successful, and welcome in high society. Through cultural consumption and display, he becomes a respected editor and a major art expert. Not immune to the dangerous stereotypes it depicts, Duval's text not only tells the story of the Roussy family through the Netsuke, it simultaneously documents, in ways similar to Mallarmé, Zola, and Proust, how Japanism of the period functioned as a social equalizer and indeed as a new aesthetic continent for an assimilation that exceeded Orientalist appropriations by the West. Thank you for your attention.